On a quiet morning at a wildlife reserve, a young boy is left behind, alone on a dusty road. His cries echo in the still air. Nearby, a majestic lion, Scout, notices the sound, his keen instincts alerting him to the child's distress. Locking eyes with the boy, the massive creature lets out a deep, resonating roar, sending a wave of fear through the child. Scout's body tenses as he begins charging toward him with an overwhelming power and intensity. What happens next is beyond anything one might imagine. Scout, a powerful lion, circled around the boy, who was now trembling uncontrollably. His cries grew louder, his fear palpable. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky with the soft hues of dawn. Yet, the road remained empty, save for the boy and the great lion, who now seemed to command the very earth beneath them. The lion's eyes, bright and calculating, scanned the boy, his heavy paws pressed down on the earth with each step. The morning breeze rustled through his impressive mane, a symbol of his authority and strength. His muscles rippled beneath his golden coat as he paced back and forth, his eyes fixed on the boy, whose tear-streaked face looked more helpless with each passing second. The boy's swollen cheeks told the tale of his distress, and his eyes, filled with fear and confusion, sought an escape that wasn't there. Suddenly, Scout stopped. His massive body froze in place, and for a brief, tension-filled moment, the world stood still. His eyes narrowed, and without warning, he raised his head high, his mouth parting, as he let out an earth-shattering roar. The sound seemed to vibrate the very ground beneath them, the lion's fury and dominance on full display. The boy could do nothing but stare in awe and terror. With nowhere to run, the boy stood motionless, unsure of what to do. Scout, the apex predator, let out another fierce roar, a warning shot through the air. His eyes blazed with an intensity that seemed to reach into the very depths of the child's soul. There was no doubt about it. This lion was a force of nature, but Scout wasn't just any lion. His story began long before this moment, in a time of pain and loss. He had been rescued by Ethan, a wildlife ranger, when he was nothing more than a helpless cub. Ethan had found him curled up against his mother's lifeless body after poachers had mercilessly attacked her. The cub was far too young to survive on his own, so Ethan took him in, raising him with love and care, waking at all hours of the night to ensure Scout's survival. Ethan, a young and passionate wildlife enthusiast, had worked at the reserve since the age of 16. He understood the delicate balance of nature and knew how important it was to ensure that Scout would grow into a strong, independent lion. He understood the need for Scout to integrate with other lions, to learn from the pride and find his place in the world. He couldn't let Scout become too dependent on humans. It was crucial for the lion's survival and for the natural order of things. The reserve, a vast and protected sanctuary, was home to several lion prides. Ethan hoped that one of the experienced lionesses would take Scout under her wing and care for him as her own. Fortunately, his hopes were realized when a gentle but fiercely protective lioness, who had just given birth to her third cub, accepted Scout into her family. This lioness was one of the most nurturing and kind-hearted creatures Ethan had ever encountered, a perfect match for the orphaned cub. With her, Scout learned the ways of the wild, growing stronger with each passing year. As time passed, Scout grew into a magnificent lion, his size and strength unmatched. He had become a dominant male on the reserve, a true leader among his peers. His courage and fierce determination had earned him the respect of the other animals, and though he had been involved in his fair share of fights, Scout had come out victorious time and time again. It wasn't always pretty, but in the wild, survival was everything. Ethan was proud of Scout's growth, but still kept a watchful eye on him, knowing that the challenges of the wild could always present a threat. But the reserve wasn't without its dangers. Recently, poachers had been infiltrating the area, putting all the animals at risk. No harm had come to the wildlife yet, but it was clear that the boundaries of the reserve needed to be strengthened to protect the animals. Scout, however, was not concerned with poachers. His focus was on the present moment, and right now, that moment involved the crying boy in front of him. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a golden light across the land, Scout's stomach growled. He had been tracking his prey, knowing that finding food outside the safety of a pride was always a challenge for a solitary lion. But Scout was resourceful and had learned how to survive on his own. Little did he know, today would not be about hunting for food. It would be a moment that would define both his life and the life of the boy he had encountered. The lion, with all his power and wisdom, stood in the road, facing a child who had been left behind, his cries echoing in the air. The encounter between predator and child would soon unfold in ways that no one could have predicted. Would the mighty lion attack, or would something else happen? Something unexpected, something that would change the course of their lives forever? The massive lion, Scout, stood tall and stretched his muscular frame, his enormous paws reaching out in front of him. His body moved with the grace of a predator, each muscle rippling beneath his golden coat. Yet something was different. A subtle shift in the air caught his attention, a sound carried by the breeze, and an unfamiliar scent wafted toward him. The lion's senses heightened instantly, every hair on his body standing on end. This was no ordinary moment. Something important was unfolding. Without hesitation, Scout followed the scent, his keen instincts guiding him forward. There, on the dirt road, in the soft glow of the early morning sun, he spotted him, a small abandoned child. The boy was sitting alone, his tiny frame hunched and vulnerable in the middle of the road. His blue jacket's hood was pulled tightly over his head, but the sound of his cries was unmistakable, loud, distressed, and full of fear. The lion's golden eyes locked onto the boy, his sharp gaze unwavering as he took in the scene. He could feel the boy's distress, but something within Scout shifted. For a moment he hesitated. His massive form loomed in the background, keeping a safe distance from the child, circling cautiously, never breaking eye contact. The sound of the boy's wails filled the air, yet the lion's behavior was changing with each passing second. His powerful body paced back and forth, torn by an unfamiliar uncertainty, as though unsure of how to react. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the atmosphere shifted. A new scent filled the air, stronger and more aggressive than before. Scout's nostrils flared, his hackles rising in an instant. His muscles tensed, ready for whatever was to come. He locked eyes with the boy, whose face was swollen and tear-streaked. The child's cries had stopped for a split second, as Scout's gaze seemed to pierce through him, sensing something more. A low growl rumbled in the lion's chest as he let out a terrifying roar, his teeth bared in a flash of deadly white. The sound was so deafening that the boy froze, stunned into silence. For a moment, anger seemed to blaze in Scout's eyes, yet the boy could feel that the lion's fury was not directed at him. It was something else, something behind him. Without warning, Scout charged forward. The boy barely had time to react as the lion leaped over his head, the earth shaking beneath the force of the lion's powerful leap. Before the boy could even comprehend what was happening, a deafening thump reverberated through the air, and he instinctively turned. What he saw next was a nightmare brought to life. Another lion, larger and more aggressive, had appeared, its massive form pinning the boy's first protector to the ground. Scout, relentless and swift, stood tall over the other lion, roaring with a fury that only a true apex predator could possess. His claws slashed through the air, ripping into the other lion's flesh as he fought to assert his dominance. The struggle was brief but intense, the second lion no match for Scout's raw power. The intruder struggled to break free from Scout's unyielding grip, but was ultimately forced to retreat, limping away with its tail between its legs. Scout's focus remained sharp, his anger still simmering. Meanwhile, Ethan, a wildlife ranger, was making his way down the dirt road in his Jeep, unaware of the incredible scene unfolding just ahead. As he rounded the corner, his eyes locked onto the unbelievable sight before him. Two lions, locked in combat, their roars echoing across the land. At first, Ethan thought nothing of it. It was a common sight in his line of work, but as his gaze shifted, his heart skipped a beat. There, just a few feet away from the fighting lions, was the boy. The sight of the child so close to the deadly predators sent a sickening wave of dread through Ethan's chest. How had the child ended up in the reserve, and more importantly, was he in danger? Ethan's hands gripped the wheel tighter, his pulse quickening. He slammed his foot onto the pedal, launching the Jeep into high gear, racing toward the boy with urgency. Behind him, the second lion had freed itself and limped off, disappearing into the brush. Scout, however, was still in the fight, roaring in defiance, unwilling to let any threat near the child. The roar was deafening, and Ethan's mind raced. He loved Scout more than anything. The lion was like a son to him, but if Scout had harmed the child, it would be disastrous for the reserve. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he fought the urge to panic. Then something happened that nearly caused Ethan to crash his Jeep in shock. As he approached the scene, he witnessed something he never could have imagined. Instead of attacking, Scout, the fierce lion who had once been a helpless cub, was lying down next to the boy, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and strength around him. It was as if Scout had become a living barrier, guarding the child with a devotion that took Ethan's breath away. The lion's fierce eyes scanned the surroundings, his head swiveling to ensure there were no other threats lurking nearby. Ethan's shock slowly turned into awe. This wasn't just a territorial dispute between two lions. Scout hadn't been fighting over food or dominance. He had been protecting the child. As the realization hit, Ethan's mind drifted back to the day he had found Scout, helpless and alone, lying next to his mother's lifeless body. Had the lion seen something in the crying child that resonated with his own painful past? Whatever it was, Ethan could hardly believe it. The protective instincts of the lion were unlike anything he had ever witnessed. The ranger, overwhelmed with gratitude and disbelief, knew he had to act fast. Even with Scout's protective stance, the boy was still in the road. He had to get him to safety and find out what had brought him here. But Scout, ever the guardian, did not make it easy for Ethan to approach. Ethan slowly cut the engine and opened the door of his Jeep. Every step he took felt like a lifetime as he carefully approached the scene, unsure of how Scout would react. Would the lion allow him to get close to the child? Or had the bond between them grown so strong that no human could come near? Ethan's mind raced as he took slow, deliberate steps, praying that his judgment of Scout had been right all along. He needed to get the boy out of harm's way, but doing so would require an immense amount of trust from both the lion and the ranger. Ethan was the only person Scout trusted completely. The young ranger had spent countless hours observing the lion, learning his habits and tracking his movements, all without ever disturbing him. Scout knew Ethan was there. There was a bond, one that transcended mere companionship. It was as if the lion could still remember the day Ethan had rescued him as a cub, a memory that made him treat Ethan differently from everyone else. Now, standing before Scout, Ethan could only hope that the trust they had built over the years would play to his advantage. Stepping out of the Jeep, Ethan approached slowly, cautiously, aware of the immense power before him. Scout's eyes never left him as he took each deliberate step, his gaze calm yet intense, as if assessing the ranger's every move. The lion's powerful form rose from the ground with a slow stretch, his muscles rippling as he casually strolled away from Ethan. Scout wasn't in any rush. He had already decided. Ethan knew better than to rush toward the boy. He'd passed Scout's test, and he wasn't about to ruin everything by acting hastily. The bond between man and lion was fragile, and he had to tread carefully. As the lion moved farther away, Ethan finally stepped forward, scooping the boy into his arms. The little child, whose earlier cries had echoed through the reserve, seemed calm now, nestled against the ranger's chest. Yet, as the lion disappeared from view, the boy's sobs returned, raw and full of sorrow. Ethan's mind raced. Why had the boy been abandoned on the road, and how had Scout known exactly how to protect him? The ranger glanced down at the child, his thoughts swirling in confusion. Despite everything that had happened, Scout had acted out of something far deeper than instinct. There was a connection, a primal understanding between them all. After securing the boy in the Jeep, Ethan carefully began driving back to the reserve's office. His thoughts never left the child's situation. What had led to this moment? The only way to get answers was to review the security footage from the reserve's boundaries. He hoped it would give him some answers, anything to make sense of the boy's abandonment. The footage revealed something that shattered Ethan's heart. He watched as a battered old car slowly approached the reserve's boundary. It was a tight shot, but Ethan could make out a young man behind the wheel. A few moments later, a woman climbed out of the car, holding the small child in her arms. She seemed to be scanning the area, her eyes searching for something, and then she found it. A gap in the fence. The footage showed her struggling at first, but after a few moments she pushed her way through, her grip firm around the child as she placed him carefully on the dirt track where Ethan had found him. The woman kissed the boy gently on the forehead before getting back into the car and driving off without him. Ethan's heart sank. What could possibly drive a mother to leave her child in such a dangerous place? The kiss was tender, filled with love, yet the act was brutal. He watched as the little boy looked around, his tiny hands reaching for his parents, who were already gone. It didn't make sense. Why leave him in a wildlife reserve, in the path of predators, with security cameras monitoring everything? Had she hoped someone would find him immediately, or had she believed the reserve would take care of him? Whatever the reasoning, it broke Ethan's heart. He would search for answers, but he feared the child's parents were long gone. With the footage reviewed, Ethan turned to face the boy. The child, who had been trembling with fear moments earlier, was now eating the food that Ethan had prepared. He seemed to be calming down. As he ate, Ethan tried to engage him, gently asking for his name. The boy's response, whispered softly, was David. David. A name that would soon become so important to Ethan. The authorities had been contacted, but the young ranger found himself distracted by the boy's innocent curiosity. David, having finished his meal, was now focused on Ethan's phone, where he had been watching videos. The child's attention kept drifting to the outside, pointing excitedly toward the open window. "Lion," he said, his tiny finger pointing to the distance, roaring. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Despite everything the boy had been through, he still found joy in the simple things. The ranger quizzed the authorities on what would happen to David next. They told him that if no family members could be found, the boy would be placed in an orphanage, hoping for an adoption to give him a new family. The thought of it weighed heavily on Ethan. He had seen firsthand how difficult it could be for a child in such a situation. The upheaval, the emotional toll. It would be a hard life for David, even with the potential of a new family. Ethan found himself staring at the boy, struck by a thought that seemed to crystallize in his mind. Scout had been rescued as a cub, abandoned and left to die. And now Ethan was watching another child, abandoned in the same way. The similarities between Scout's story and David's were uncanny. The young ranger realized with a growing sense of certainty that there was only one thing he could do. Just as he had rescued Scout, he would rescue David. It was a crazy decision. Ethan had no experience caring for a child. But as he looked at David, a deep instinct stirred within him. The boy had captured his heart just as Scout had all those years ago. There was no way he could let him go to an orphanage. He would give David the family he deserved. A few days later, the authorities confirmed that David's family could not be found. The boy would have to go to the orphanage, but Ethan knew he couldn't let that happen. As difficult as the process would be, he would adopt David. The adoption process was long and grueling, but Ethan's resolve never wavered. Finally, after months of paperwork, waiting, and hope, Ethan became David's legal guardian. The father and son took their first real drive together, a journey to see the lions to celebrate their new life as a family. As the Jeep slowly rolled past the familiar stretch of road where David had been found, Scout appeared in the distance, his massive frame standing tall in the golden light of the setting sun. The lion's eyes met David's through the Jeep's window, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Scout's gaze shifted to Ethan, as if acknowledging the bond between them, not just between man and lion, but now between a lion, a boy, and the man who had brought them together. Ethan smiled at David, his heart full, knowing that their story was just beginning. With Scout by their side, they were a family now. The wild had brought them together, and they would face whatever came next, together.